Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished guests of all ages. Thank you for joining us for the OFFA Film Festival, our 8th edition festival, and joining us for our first ever late night show. And given that it's our late night show, I hope our all ages this evening are perhaps meeting the age requirement for tonight's screenings. I am Tyler Collins. I am the film critic for Oakville News and oakvillenews.org. You can read us for free online every day at Oakville News. I am joined today by the executive director of OFFA, Wendy Donnan, and we have our 3 directors of the film and 2 shorts that you have just had the pleasure of watching at your homes. Tonight, we are very excited to present that we have Amy Coop from Annabel Lee, who is zooming in from Edinburgh, Scotland.
Hi, lovely to be here.
We also have Molly Shears from Middle of Nowhere.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, joining us from near Paris, France, we have the writer and director of Meander, tonight's feature film, Mathieu Turi.
Hello, guys.
Now, we're so glad that you're joining us for tonight's Q&A event, and we're glad that you bought a ticket to these movies. However, tonight's event is going to work slightly differently than our other live Q&A sessions, namely because we are not currently live. This is pre-taping in advance of the festival. So while we're glad you're joining us, your questions can't be funneled into the chat like all the other events that we've been having over the course of both the festival and all of Saturday today. We hope you enjoyed tonight's feature program, and we'd love to hear your feedback on it. In the meantime, we're going to jump straight in to talk about the excellent movies we just watched. Let's start with you, Mathieu, talking about Meander. I'll admit, I am not a fan of a lot of horror movies. I get unsettled very easily, and I was surprised how much I enjoyed watching this film. What would you say to audiences who might be hesitant to the idea of your movie if they're not into scary movies? How would you entice them or excite them to see it?
First, it's a very compliment what you said, because when people don't like that kind of movies, it's kind of the best audience because you can surprise them, or it's kind of the challenge, but it's always good. So I would say that it's not the kind of movie that you're looking from the outside and just want to look somebody in pain. It's the opposite. You want to be with the character and you want to go through the journey. So that was my main goal with the movie. It's not a voyeur movie, and like the Saw movies, which I love, but for different reasons. It's more of you want Lisa to survive and you want to watch it and to know why. So yeah, for people who don't like that kind of movies, you can try because it's kind of different and it goes somewhere. I won't spoil the movie, but it goes somewhere.
So if you'd like to spoil events, that's okay, because everybody who is watching this has just seen the film. So we all know what happens over the course of it. And sorry, we should say that for everybody. We have all seen your movies. So you mentioned the journey that Lisa goes on this, and I find that interesting because of the claustrophobic tunnels, it's a very linear journey. And yet the film is called Meander, which means to wander or aimlessly stay lost. Why did you choose this as a title when so much of the movie is about her going in the one usually very scary direction?
Yeah, it was kind of, the French title is Meander, and it's kind of the same meaning, but not exactly. The meaning in France is more about a complicated path. It's not about, just meandering. But I was like, maybe that could be a good meaning for what I want to tell with the character, because she doesn't know where to go in her life at the beginning. And then she has to crawl in the tube and find a way. So even if she knows where she has to go, she doesn't know why and how. So it was more about meanders in the spirit. So I thought it was kind of, funny to play with that.
I like that even more. I didn't even think of that. That's great. So one of the details of this movie, of course, is it switches between French and English. Was there a challenge in either coaching your actors or doing the production in two different languages? How does that change the filming process, doing it in both?
It's kind of strange, because it's like you have a button to push, for French or for English, not exactly the same way but Gaia was, even if she's French, she worked a lot in English, so we were talking mainly in English when Peter was there. So yeah, it was not a challenge because there was not a lot of dialogue, so it was okay.
I say again, my favorite parts, and this is odd for movies, but my favorite parts, I think, when no one was talking. It was so exciting to watch her struggling in the actual scenario. And that's the mark, I think, of a great actor, when they don't need to necessarily use words to vocalize what they're thinking or feeling. I want to talk more about Gaia, but I'd like to open this to everybody now to talk about kind of some of the similarities in what you all did. One of the things that strings all three of your titles together is the uniqueness of the situations you've created. Not just the claustrophobia of Meander, but also the settings instead of the tight space, the middle of nowhere in the middle of nowhere, but also the arid environments of Annabel Lee too. So I'd like to know from all of you how you came up with your concepts of the film, and especially you, Amy, because yours was based on a poem. So if we can go around, maybe we'll start with you, Amy. Talk to us about how you came up with the concept of your movie.
I can't take credit for coming up with the concept because I didn't write it. It was written by a very talented young writer called Angel Parker, who also plays Annabel in the film. And I got involved relatively early on when they were developing the script. And yeah, and it was just that it's such a striking poem. It's such an evocative poem that Angel had taken that on and basically built a narrative around it, because it's not a particularly narrative driven poem. And so yeah, so it was presented to me as a relatively kind of fully formed idea, and then we kind of worked for about 9 months or so on fleshing out the world that we wanted to create around the film, and then looked to find a place where we could create that look and we create that feeling, because it's obviously Edgar Allan Poe is such an amazing poet and is such has such a gothic sensibility. We wanted to make sure that we were basically honoring that and doing and working in a way that we could visually represent the kind of feeling that we got when we read the poem and then read the script. So it was very much a kind of collaborative effort to kind of come up with the world of the film.
Molly, what about you?
Hey, so I started the film off with just knowing that I wanted to make a film about grief, and then I kind of created the whole story around this location. It's up like Bruce Peninsula County sort of area, and I just I traveled around all of the locations that we ended up filming at and like fed together a story that way. And I wanted it to be a new space for the character, so it's like there's a lot of unknowing and a lot of possibility, but unfamiliarity. So there isn't really like any direct answers yet.
And Matthew, how did you come up with the idea of someone crawling through tunnels for an hour and a half, possibly with aliens?
Actually, it comes from Aliens by James Cameron, because you have that little scene in the movie where you have Bishop trying to go from a point to another, and he has to go in a strange pipe like this, and I was like, something is gonna happen, and nothing happened, but it was terrifying, the situation. So when I was like, I want to do for my second movie, I want to do something very high concept. I was like, okay, let's do something set in one space, but usually it's about not moving and just wanting to get out. And I was like, what's interesting in that scene in the movie? It's about a closed space, but it has to move. And I was like, maybe I could do a movie about someone who has to move, and if she stops, she dies. So that's the opposite of the idea of a closed space, but it's claustrophobic. So I was like, maybe I could do something like that with that. And then I got the idea to use all the metaphor of the life after death and what the light in the tunnel, and everything comes in place. And it was like natural to do it after that.
It's interesting you mentioned aliens, because what I think of the parent or the adult-child relationship between Ripley and the little girl she finds, but also near the end of Aliens, when they're in the second research facility, she's also crawling through the tunnel and also with the little girl that's with her. For me, when I think about inspirations, I think it's easy and fair to say that the popular Saw franchise draws a lot of easy comparisons to some of the scenes and traps that were designed for Meander. And yet I liked yours a lot more, and I'm not sure why. The one that is similar in Saw, I think 2, again, I'm not a fan of these, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in Saw 2 is the incinerator where they're crawling through trying to get a vaccine vial for a disease. Were there any of these traps from any of those films that helped kind of design the stakes or the conflict in your story?
I was not inspired by a trap, even if I love that saga. It was more about, having simple traps and based on simple stuff like, the fire, the water, and then it becomes more and more complicated, but it's kind of easy to understand and easy to get. To put you in the situation, you don't have to go, okay, if I do that, I take the key and then I come back and then I can, like in the Saw movies, it's not about being quick, it's more about sensation and feelings. So I was interested in doing simple traps. And then it becomes more psychological traps and the idea of confronting the loss. It's kind of another trap. It's evolving like that. So no, it was not direct interpretation. I love, I always have that, okay, it's like Cube, it's like Saw, but the real inspiration was The Descent by Neil Marshall. And you don't have any relation between the two if you think about it, but I love how he plays with darkness in the movie. And I composed the shots like this, and I was very fan of the movie. So I was like, okay, that to me, inspiration is more. It's not literal, it's more about feelings.
Let's move on now from the claustrophobia of Meander. I want to talk about the settings of both of our short films as well, because again, there's this great contrast between feeling closed in and feeling stuck in openness too. So I'd love to hear from both Amy and Molly, whoever wants to go first. How did the setting play as a character and the relationships to the humans? How did that change your movies?
The setting for Annabel Lee is incredibly important. And as you say, it very much is another character. We shot on the North Devon coast in England, which is this incredibly dramatic piece of coastline. It's all this, I mean, as you've seen in the film, it's stunning. It's the North Atlantic coast, and it's incredibly evocative. It's kind of black rock and heavy seas, and gives this real wildness. And there's a real sense of this untamed nature in that kind of part of the world.
And I think also it helped evoke that there was kind of this isolationism taking place as well.
Absolutely. And again, because the story is about these two young people who are effectively on the run from something which we don't fully understand, and they get to the edge of the world. As far as they're concerned, they get to the edge of their known world and are waiting for a boat to pick them up to take them to safety. And so they're up against a natural kind of barrier and a figurative one as well. And it was so important that the location that we found for the film really kind of represented the brutality of the real world that they were facing, the uncertainty of the world that they were facing because of what they were running away from. And so we spent a great deal of time trying to find that location. And the whole place is a place called Heartland, which is this little peninsula that sticks out of the edge of North Devon. and it's all in the one place. So all of the locations you see in the film are within this one relatively small stately home estate called Hartland Abbey. And it's a stunning place, and it's a gift for a filmmaker, I think, because when you go up there and you stand there, everything is just so striking and so stunning and so cinematic. We really had to kind of think about, okay, how are we going to best do this to serve the story and serve the character journeys, rather than it just become this series of postcard shots of this incredibly stunning place. So there was a real effort, I think, on the part of our team to make sure that everything that we were doing, and every space that we were choosing, under the bridge, in the church, on the foreshore and on the beach, and in the cottage, obviously, was all there for a very specific kind of narrative and character reason, and also created this sense of unease and this sense of them being alone, but still never quite being alone. So the feeling that they're just being watched, and there's something a little bit unsettling about what's going on. And that place feels like that. You just stand there, and just the sound of the waves and the sound of the wind. It's a really, really kind of, stunning part of the world.
I'll go ahead. So same sort of story. Like, we were so lucky to be able to shoot where we shot. I had to do a lot of convincing, but I
eventually convince the argument.
I sent a really long emotional email about how I just had to film there, or else like I wouldn't be okay with being an artist to the national park. and they're like, okay. So yeah, and then I shot in a bunch of other areas as well in that region. But yeah, for us, like, a huge element was actually just the sound. I'm sorry, my landlord is drilling something, so I'm sorry if it screws up the sound here. But we wanted it to be like, these forests are super dense, and they could be filled with like literally anything, not just like native to Ontario species. And I considered, with the theme of grief, every character has their own sort of path within the film, and we wanted to like introduce the environment to each character. Like, they have their own reaction to it, and they have their own experience within the environment, and they take things very literally, very differently.
So two of the elements that I noticed really make all of your stories pop, and add to the suspense that, Amy, you were talking about, are both the use of color and your use of the underscore music. And I think those are two really easy elements that often can add to the emotional experience of watching a movie. And that's a big thing in these genres. So this is kind of open just to whoever wants to talk about it. What are some of the ways you were using color as motifs, or as ways to direct our eyes on camera? Or what are some of the ways you use music to kind of set the mood and inspire these reactions in your audiences?
Color's a huge thing for me. One of the first people I always sit down with is the DOP and ideally the colorist, to talk about the tonal palette that we want to kind of create. And we brought the production designer and the costume designer into those conversations, because I had a very specific tonal palette in mind for how I wanted the film to have an emotional impact through the progression of the film. And there are some very kind of stark moments in terms of the way that the visual journey of the film follows the emotional journey of the characters to some degree, and the use of lighting and lighting changes. It's such a key part of the film that I was trying to make, and it's something that I always try and do with all of my films. We were really lucky to have a great team. Neil Osman was our DOP, who's a genius, and the use of particularly of kind of blues and greys and blacks for certain parts of their journey, just because it's got this sense of foreboding and this sense of tragedy, which effectively, because it is a tragic love story, effectively, but there are still moments of levity, and there are moments of light, and there are moments of sunshine. We were incredibly lucky when we were filming. We were filmed in December, in December in the UK is never the greatest time to be filming on a beach.
Never the time to be at a beach, period.
Absolutely. And the storms that you see in the film are actually real. But we had that one day when we had the scene where they run down onto the beach and they're playing in the water. That was literally in December. But we were all in t-shirts because the sun was out and it was an amazing day. And it gave us these incredible contrasts, just in terms of the feeling of warmth in that scene, juxtaposed against the coolness of the dream sequences, and how the story kind of then gets darker and darker as it kind of goes along. And it's such an important part of supporting the narrative to create those kind of colors and textures. That, again, it's something which I'm always striving to to try and marry those things together whenever we're making a film.
For Middle of Nowhere, I wanted the color and the lighting to be like very idyllic and like happy, and I wanted it to be kind of like a happiness wash over, like kind of like a distraction from like the actual sadness that was like took place because of the events before the story. So like we have this scene in the field where it's like the most beautiful like sunset lighting and it's super idealistic, but then in the background like you hear the noises of the creature, and you hear, you know, the forest and all of that, and all of the kind of sad and bad stuff is like lurking a little bit off screen. And then for sound, for music, I worked with a local artist named Nick Nussbaum, who I've actually known since I was 2. And we worked on the music for like a good I don't know, 4 months maybe, and changed it a lot. But our main sort of goal was to make the music sound like it was stuck a little bit in the trees and it was like part of the environment. And it's a lot of like pushing and pulling within the actual songs.
And for me, about, you know, we talked about very earlier with the DOP, we were like, okay, he said to me, I have a crazy idea. Yeah. We're gonna shoot in complete darkness and the only light will be the bracelet, you know. And I was like, it's crazy. But actually it was a good idea, because it was like, you know, you talked about a lot about how Lisa is the light in the darkness. So let's put that in real idea and let's do it for it. And we did some tests and it was just amazing. So we because, you know, when it's in a closed space, it can be boring to light and you have to find ideas. And it was like, no, everything, every time she moves, everything changes. So it was kind of a challenge, because the bracelet was supposed just to be thin, and now it's kind of big stuff, and we had to find the LED system, and the battery was in the costume. So you had a cable coming here, and then we like, oh, in the script, the bracelet has to go underwater and she has to throw it at some time. So it was kind of, you know, the nightmare. And we have
how long did it take to design the prop of Lisa's bracelet?
I would say from the beginning to the end, 2 months. Yeah. From the first draft, the first design, and then we had to did some tests with some pieces, because I didn't want something, you know, I wanted something very round and very strange. So we had to find this in Germany, I guess it was in Germany, and to do some test, and you're like, it becomes a nightmare, because it's kind of you know, very short time batteries. So every, I would say, 2 hours it was flashing in red, and it was like there is no battery left. So sometimes it was in the middle of a scene, you're like, oh, it's awesome, and then bam, everything is going red, and you're like, there is no battery. And you have to, because it's very complicated, you have to just rid of all the costume, change the battery, and do it again. So it's maybe 45 minutes just to change the battery. So
that's a lot of time.
Yeah, when you're shooting, yeah. Especially when you have one actress and you can't shoot anything during that time. So yeah, it was complicated. But you know, it helped a lot, because we had that system where we can, with an iPad, we can change the colors, even the it could flash, and we had a lot to do outside from it. And we were like, okay, let's put the idea that when somebody's dead, it's kind of blue, and it was very interesting. It was kind of a challenge in the prep, but then in shooting, it was very, very interesting, because I would say 95% of the movie is lightened by that. And it's not, when you hear that from a DOP, you're like, maybe it's going to be easier for him. No, it was very, very complicated, because to have it to have it being the only light, you had to put everything in smoke. So you had a lot of smoke in the studio every time, because it helped for the light and for it to be like, sci-fi, strange light. So it was very complicated, but I'm very happy about the results. And yeah, for the music, it was kind of a work with the sound, because we were like, the intention was to put the audience in the middle of it. So we worked a lot about specialization and some evolving sound during the movie. And I had to put out some music, because sometimes, music and sound are like this, and sometimes it's like this. so it was kind of, again, test and trying to just, again, put the audience in the middle of the tube and not just outside of it. So, yeah.
So one of the things that sticks out from Meander, there's a lot of complicated shots as you're trying to film all the various puzzles and traps. The underwater shots, there was the moving tunnel where the camera was on the side and we could see both levels. The acid pit, when there was a camera in the acid pit. In your opinion, as director, and maybe your DOP has an opinion on this too, what was the hardest scene to film in the movie? And why?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I would say it's the kind of near to the end, the strange bubble of organic stuff, It was complicated because it was kind of very wet. You can put nothing in it, just the camera, and the DOP was like, because all the material would have destroyed everything. And because it was kind of a round shape like this, we had to put the crew inside, so 2 people, because there is not enough space. So the DOP was there, all the crew was working, and then, okay, let's shoot. We had to close everything, and it was, again, maybe 20 minutes to close everything, because it was, kind of elastic stuff, and you can just put something on it and say, oh, it's gonna work, because everything is on wires. And then we had to shoot, and then we had to, I think maybe we did 20 shots like this, and then we had to cut the bubble just to have some crazy shot, and it has to be the last shot because you had to cut everything. So yeah, it was kind of a mess, and it was very, and it stinks a lot. But no, more seriously, about just the general fact that I didn't want, to have simple shots, just to have one shot from the side, one shot from the face, and then in editing just say, oh, let's put some rhythm in it. I really wanted to have crazy shots and crazy movements. So we invented some rigs from scratch. We use the camera, it's the Sony Venice. It's used now on the Avatar sequels, and it's kind of a crazy camera. They invented a system on it for Top Gun 2 to shoot in the cockpit. It's a big cinema camera, but you can have maybe just one third of it. You can cut it in half, and you have a big wire, and then so you can shoot everything with just one part of the camera, and the other side is very far away. So your 6K big cinema camera is just like this. So, and then you put that. We constructed a little cage, and for example, for all the shot when she moved like that on 10 meters, we put that in a little cage. We had some wires, and it was like, okay, action, let's do that, So for each shot, it was like this, create some stuff, and to have that kind of, turning shot. Usually you have just, you can take a classic crane, but because it was in a tiny space, we had to invent it stuff. And sometimes we just we constructed one part of the tube just for one shot. And it was the shot when she comes like this, and then we do this, and then we do this. So we are kind of upside down during the shot. And it was, that kind of shot where you shoot, and you have the crew taking some stuff and putting like this, and okay, that works. And then it's cinema magic, and it looks good. But if you have the making of, we are just like, like this. So yeah, it was crazy, but it was so good to do.
I think that's a common theme that the other two directors here will share. There's a lot of these moments of cinema magic where the impossible shot happens, and then you're pulling your hair, anxiously waiting as you're watching it happen, and the euphoria that comes when it's over. I want to ask each of you, none of yours, there was a little something unsettling about everybody's movies. So I don't think it's often you'd have a crew member themselves or a cast member actually scared. But did you have any instances on set for anybody where there was one member of the crew who was nervous or upset or wondering, oh, I'm scared for what's about to happen? Did that ever come up in any of your shoots?
Yeah, we certainly, the prospect of putting our lead actress in the Atlantic Ocean in December wearing nothing but a kind of a silk dress, when the producer is also her dad, was interesting. And that was a really, really difficult scene to shoot, because with that took, she was literally lying on the beach with water running underneath her in December, freezing cold. She had a wetsuit on underneath the dress, and we had, with all kinds of things to try and keep her warm, and we had a medic standing by and all of that stuff. But it was really, really challenging. And yeah, going into that, everybody was a bit nervous about whether
Dad
it would be a good idea.
What was Dad like on set? Was he shaking, scared?
He was very good. He was very stoic, and he was very supportive. There were times when he had to walk away because he found it quite emotionally challenging. Just seeing his daughter acting out this death scene, he found very kind of emotionally challenging. And then just the logistics of it, I think, were challenging for all of us, because it was absolutely freezing cold. And Angel was being, a real trooper. And but there was one point when literally the medic came up to me and just took me aside at one point and was like, Ames, you've got one more take. I need to get Angel out of the sea or she's going to die. So we were kind of, we really did, it was slightly nerve-wracking.
What was it like hearing the words, you've got one more take or your actor is going to die?
I think, Gary, who's our medic, who I've known for a long time, he has a certain way with words. And he was just, he's there to do a job, and he was there to support, the welfare of all of us. But obviously, she's the one we're all there in North Face coats and waterproofs and the whole 9 yards, and she's wearing, a slip of a dress. And we have to take those things seriously, and we have to kind of, the welfare of our cast is absolutely utmost. So when the medic says, I think he was kind of ever so slightly over-egging the situation, but we couldn't just shoot with impunity and keep shooting and shooting and shooting until we got something perfect, because you just can't do that. I mean, you have to be sensible.
Sorry, there was a phone call coming in. We're almost out of time, but I have one more question that I'd like to hear from each of the three of you specifically. And if you were to sum up your answer in 1 or 2 sentences, here it is. I think that science fiction, horror, thriller, these are genres that often get sidelined or uncharacteristically and inappropriately called shallow or inferior. Why is it important that we tell stories in this genre? And to each of you as a director, why is it important we do this? Big question, I know.
I will start. Okay. I guess if you look at some past movies, now we're talking about classics. It's you can say maybe easy 10 or 15 science fiction movies, like they're not just important, but that are part of cinema. And I'm not talking just about technology, like Avatar or like this, but if you think about Alien, Blade Runner, that kind of movies, you're like, this is not just good movies or excellent movies or masterpieces. It's also movies that make cinema better. And I think that it's kind of the most universal genre to talk about what we are, and we use the future to talk about the present.
I would say that the great thing about genre movies, genre stories, is it enables us to tell stories that are slightly outside of our normal human experience, but while still relevant. And it enables us to tell stories that explore ideas that are important just in terms of the human experience, that we wouldn't be able to do if everything was straightforward drama. It enables us to be more probing, I think, with the kind of the stories that we're telling.
Yeah, I think that with genre movies, Middle of Nowhere, I would say, is fantasy. I think that it explores very real life issues and things that we can all resonate with, but it explores it in a different way that I think makes an audience reconsider a given situation better.
Well said, all three of you. And Amy Coop, Molly Shears, Mathieu Turi, thank you so much for making the time to do this. Thank you for time traveling with us as we record this on a Friday, and then 8 days later, the world will get to experience this. Both shorts and also the Canadian premiere. This is the first time anyone in Canada gets to see Meander. So we're really grateful to all three of you for sharing your movies with us and also being here today to talk about them. Thank you, our audience, for staying up this late. It's been a marathon day. This is our 5th event of Saturday here at OFFA, and now it is time to go to bed because tomorrow is Multiculturalism Day, and we have 4 more programs and 5 more features that we are so excited to share with you, our audiences. We hope you will join us. If you don't have your all access pass, certainly buy single tickets for it. And last, of course, after you've watched the movies, please vote for the OFFA Audience Choice Award right here on this page in Eventive. At the bottom, when you click on each film title, you'll see a rating at the bottom of your screen with a rating scale from 1 to 5, meaning either it wasn't for you, or you loved it. Please vote on every movie you watch, because those ratings from the audience will determine who wins the Audience Choice Award that gets announced at our award show on Wednesday, July 7th. Meanwhile, on behalf of myself, Wendy, and everybody at OFFA, we're so grateful. Thank you, all of you, for joining us tonight. Have a great evening. Please stay home, stay safe. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, do that. It's time. Anybody can get one now. It's fantastic. It is the real miracle of the science fiction made real. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone.